"I know what you are," she said, standing at the edge of the canyon with the valley spread out below her and the mansion rising from its center like a lie made of stone and timber. "You're not a trapper. You never were. And every word you said on that porch about honesty, about partnership, you said it knowing this was waiting at the end of 4 days of trail." Jeremiah Stone said nothing, and his silence told her everything. She had sold her future to a stranger to save her family. She had not sold it to this. Subscribe now and tell me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's see together how far this story can travel. Now let's go. The foreclosure notice was still wet with morning dew when Charlotte pulled it off the fence post and read it for the third time, as though the words might change if she stared long enough. They didn't change. 42 days. That was all the time her family had before the bank took everything: the house, the land, the livestock. Everything her father had spent 30 years building from bare Montana soil would be stripped away and sold to pay debts that had been stacking since her mother died 2 winters ago. She folded the notice into a tight square and slid it into her apron pocket. Then she walked back inside before her younger sister could see her face. Clara was 16. Thomas was 14. Neither of them fully understood what 42 days meant. Charlotte had decided they wouldn't. Not if she could help it. Her father, Robert Bennett, was propped against 2 pillows in the back bedroom, his breathing shallow and wet in a way that frightened her every morning when she pressed her ear to the door before entering. The doctor had come twice that month. Both times he had left without saying much, which was its own kind of answer. "Papa," she said, keeping her voice level, "how are you feeling?" "Like a man who's run out of road." He coughed once hard. "Sit down, Charlotte." She sat on the edge of the bed. He reached for her hand and held it with both of his, the way he used to when she was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I need you to listen to me without arguing," he said. "That depends on what you say." The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "Still your mother's daughter." He exhaled slowly. "Henry Walsh came by yesterday while you were in town." Henry Walsh, the bank's man. Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. "He told me there's been an offer," her father continued. "On the debt, all of it. Someone willing to clear the entire balance and take on the operating costs through spring." Charlotte stared at him. "Who?" "A man named Jeremiah Stone." The name meant nothing to her. "He lives up in the mountains," her father said, watching her face carefully. "Keeps to himself mostly. People in town know him as a trapper." "A trapper," she said it flatly. "A trapper wants to pay off $30,000 in ranch debt." "Apparently so." "And what does he want in return?" Her father was quiet for a moment. That silence told her more than any words. "Papa." "He's asked to meet you," Robert Bennett said. "Today, here. He'll be riding down this morning." Charlotte stood up from the bed. She crossed to the window and stood there with her back to her father, looking out at the fence line where the foreclosure notice had been nailed. She could still see the outline of the nail hole in the post from here. "He wants to marry me," she said. It wasn't a question. He was very respectful about it. Walsh said the man spoke about you specifically, said he'd heard you were... Her father paused, searching for the right words. Capable, serious, a woman who knew how to work. "That's a strange reason to propose marriage to a stranger." "It is," her father agreed. "But Charlotte, I need you to hear me. I'm not asking you to do this. I would never ask you to do this. What I'm asking is that you meet him, hear him out, and then make your own decision with your eyes open." She turned around. "And if I say no..." Robert Bennett looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something raw and defeated and deeply ashamed. "Then we lose everything," he said quietly. "And Clara and Thomas get split between your uncle's place in Billings and the church home in Bozeman." The church home. Charlotte knew what that meant. She had been inside it once at 15, delivering food donations with her mother. She remembered the smell. She remembered the silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of children who had stopped expecting anything. "What time is he coming?" she asked. Jeremiah Stone arrived at 11 o'clock on a horse that was better than his clothes suggested it should be. Charlotte noticed that immediately. The animal was strong and well kept, its coat brushed and its shoes freshly set. A working man's horse maybe, but not a trapper's horse. She was standing on the porch when he rode up, and she studied him without pretending not to. He was tall, she could tell that even before he dismounted. Dark hair longer than what men in town wore, pushed back from a face that was angular and weathered and younger than she had expected. He had a beard that gave him a rough look, but his eyes when they found hers were calm, steady, not arrogant, not hungry, just watchful. He tied his horse at the post and walked up to the porch steps. He stopped at the bottom and looked up at her. "Miss Bennet." "Mr. Stone." A beat passed between them. Neither of them moved. "You want to come inside?" she asked. "I'm fine out here if you are." She was. She felt better outdoors, more like herself. She gestured to the chairs at the far end of the porch, and they both sat angled toward each other a proper distance apart. "You've already spoken to my father," she said. "I have." "Then you know he told me why you're here." Jeremiah folded his hands on his knees and looked at her directly. "I want to be honest with you about everything," he said. "Because I think you're the kind of woman who would find out if I wasn't, and I'd rather not start that way." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting opener. I know what I look like," he said without embarrassment. "I know what people in this valley say about me. I'm not going to argue with any of it. I live up in the mountains. I keep to myself. I'm not part of society here, and I've never tried to be." He paused. "But I can provide for your family, completely. I can clear the debt today. I can make sure your father has a doctor through the winter. Your sister and brother stay together. The ranch stays in your family's name." Charlotte watched him while he spoke. He didn't fidget. He didn't oversell. He laid it out like a man reading off a list of facts, which she found both reassuring and slightly unsettling. "And you want a wife in return," she said. "I want a partner," he said. "There's a difference." "Tell me what the difference is." He thought about it for a moment. "A wife is someone who stays in the house and manages what she's given," he said. "A partner is someone I can talk to. Someone who pushes back when I'm wrong. Someone with a spine and a brain and enough honesty to say what she thinks even when I don't want to hear it." He looked at her steadily. "I've been told you have all three." "By whom?" "People who know you. I don't make decisions without information." "That sounds like you've been investigating me." "I've been careful," he corrected. "There's a difference there, too." She almost smiled. "You do like to draw distinctions." "Precision matters," he said, "especially in agreements." Charlotte looked away from him out toward the mountains. From where she sat, she could see the far ridgeline dark against the pale morning sky, and she tried to imagine what lay beyond it. She had never gone that far. The mountains had always been just the boundary of her known world. "How far up do you live?" she asked. 4 days' ride? 4 days. She let that settle. "I'd be leaving everything I know." "Yes." "My family would stay here." "Your father would have everything he needs. Clara and Thomas would finish their schooling. I'll see to it personally." "And if I'm unhappy?" she asked. "If it doesn't work between us." He didn't flinch. "Then we talk about it," he said. "I'm not looking to trap anyone. I'm not looking for someone to make miserable." He paused and something shifted in his expression, something quieter, more careful. "I've spent most of my life alone by choice, Miss Bennet. I'm coming to you now because I've decided that a life completely alone isn't what I want anymore, but I want it done right, with someone who chose it with clear eyes." The honesty of that statement landed differently than she expected. She studied his face for a long moment. He let her. "I'll need until tomorrow morning," she said finally. "Take the time you need." He stood, offered a brief nod, and walked back to his horse. He rode away without looking back, and Charlotte sat on the porch for a long time after he disappeared around the bend in the road. So, that night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a candle and the foreclosure notice, and her mother's old Bible open in front of her, and she tried to think clearly about a situation that had no clear answer. Clara came downstairs around midnight. "Can't sleep either?" her sister asked, sliding into the chair across from her. Charlotte looked at her. At 16, Clara had their mother's face round and pretty and earnest, with a small frown of worry between her brows that she'd worn since their father got sick. She was too young to have that frown. "I'm thinking," Charlotte said, "about the man who came today." Charlotte nodded. "Thomas heard him talking to Papa," Clara said carefully. "He told us a little about the offer." She paused. "Charlotte, you don't have to. I know. I'd rather go to Bozeman than have you do something you don't want to do." Charlotte reached across the table and took her sister's hand. "You say that now," she said gently. "You haven't been inside the church home on Plum Street." Clara went quiet. "I have," Charlotte said. "And I made a decision the day I walked out of there that none of my family would ever end up somewhere like that. Not if I had any way to stop it. But to marry a stranger, he's not what I expected," Charlotte said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. Clara looked at her. "What did you expect? Someone desperate? Or cold? Or someone trying to buy something?" She turned the candle slightly, watching the flame straighten. "He was none of those things. He was careful. He spoke about it like a man who'd thought about it seriously." She paused. "He said he wanted a partner, not a wife." "Isn't that the same thing?" "He says there's a difference." Clara was quiet for the moment. Then, "Do you believe him?" Charlotte thought about the way he had looked at her. Not through her. At her. Like he was actually paying attention. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think I'd like to find out." And she told him yes the next morning. He didn't smile the way men smiled in stories, wide and triumphant, like they'd won something. He simply nodded like a man receiving confirmation that a plan he'd thought carefully about was now in motion. "We'll leave in 3 days," he said. "That gives you time with your family." "I'll need a few things explained before we go," she said. "Ask. The money. How are you clearing the debt? A trapper, even a very good one, doesn't earn the kind of money we're talking about." Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. More like calculation, the brief pause of a man deciding how much truth to give at once. "I have resources," he said. "More than people here know about." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you right now." He held her gaze. "I told you I'd be honest with you about everything. I meant that. But some things take more time to explain properly. Will you trust me until we get there?" Charlotte considered him for a long moment. "I'll trust you as far as your honesty holds," she said. "The moment that breaks, we renegotiate." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. The following morning, he rode into town and paid every cent of the Bennett debt in full. Cash. Henry Walsh reportedly turned the bills over 3 times before accepting them because men who paid like that didn't come through his office often. By evening, the story had spread through the valley. The poor mountain man had paid off the Bennett ranch. People said it in hushed, confused tones, like the sentence didn't quite fit together. Charlotte packed 2 bags, said goodbye to her father with her chin up and her voice steady, because she knew if she broke, he would too, and he couldn't afford the grief right now. She held Clara for a long time. She ruffled Thomas's hair and told him to chop the wood without being asked, and to listen to Clara even when he thought he knew better. Then she walked to where Jeremiah was waiting with the horses at the end of the road. "Ready?" he asked. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up. "Let's go," she said. The first day passed mostly in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, an observing one. Charlotte watched him the way she'd always watched people who weren't saying everything, looking for the gaps between what someone did and what it meant. He knew the trails perfectly. Not the way a man knows a road he travels regularly. The way a man knows something he owns. Every fork, every shortcut, every place where the ground softened and their horses needed to slow, he navigated it without hesitation and without a map. Other travelers they passed on the main trail treated him differently than a trapper should be treated. An older rancher named Gus Pryor, who Charlotte knew from the valley, pulled up short when he saw Jeremiah and removed his hat. Actually removed his hat, which Gus Pryor did for nobody. "Stone," the man said with a kind of careful respect in his voice. "Pryor," Jeremiah returned evenly, and they rode on. Charlotte waited until they'd put distance between themselves and the man. "Gus Pryor tips his hat to the governor and nobody else," she said. "Pryor and I have an understanding," Jeremiah said. "What kind of understanding?" "A land one." She looked at him sideways. "You own land near Gus Pryor's." "I own land in a lot of places," he said, simply, without boasting. She let that sit. On the second morning, they passed through a stretch of timber country and crossed paths with two mountain men heading the opposite direction, rough-looking men with pack mules loaded with furs. They greeted Jeremiah with immediate deference, moving aside from the trail before he asked, and the taller of the two addressed him in a tone that had edges of formality that didn't match his appearance. "Everything clear up top?" Jeremiah asked. "Yes, sir. No trouble since Thursday." "Sir." Charlotte filed that away and said nothing. It was on the evening of the second day, camped beside a quick-running creek, that she decided to push. "How many people know?" she asked. Jeremiah looked at her over the fire. "Know what?" "Whatever it is you're not telling me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Enough to make it complicated." "That's the most honest thing you've said about it." "I told you some things take more time to—" "I know what you told me," she said. "I'm not demanding it tonight. I'm just telling you that I notice things. And I've been noticing things since we left the valley." She met his eyes across the fire. "I'm not frightened. I'm not angry. But I want you to understand that by the time we arrive, wherever we're going, I expect the full truth." He looked at her steadily. "You'll have it," he said. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, but she did. The third day took them higher into the mountains than Charlotte had ever been. The air changed. Thinner, sharper, carrying a cold that didn't belong to the season. The trails narrowed, and sometimes disappeared, entirely replaced by paths that only a person who already knew they existed would find. More men passed them here. Different from the trappers, these were harder men, clearly armed, clearly stationed. They didn't just greet Jeremiah, they reported to him. Brief, quiet words. Updates on weather, on access points, on what had or hadn't moved through the area in the last several days. Charlotte absorbed everything without appearing to absorb anything. That night, camped at a high elevation with the stars pressing down like they were close enough to touch. Jeremiah sat beside the fire longer than usual. Charlotte could tell he was working something out internally. Finally he said, "Tomorrow, you'll see something that might surprise you." "I've been expecting that for 2 days," she said. "It might make you angry," he added. "Is it something I should be angry about?" He considered that. "It's something you'll have to decide for yourself," he said. "I can give you the reasons. I can't decide if they're good enough." "That's fair," she said. She wrapped her blanket tighter against the cold and looked at the fire. A log shifted and threw sparks upward. "Jeremiah," she said. "Yes." "Are you a good man?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I try to be," he said at last. "I don't always succeed, but I try, and I take the failure seriously." Charlotte nodded once. "Then we'll be fine," she said. "Whatever I see tomorrow." He turned to look at her in the firelight, and she caught something on his face that was gone almost before she could name it. Something that looked like relief. The particular relief of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had just for the first time been given permission to put it down. The fourth morning came gray and cold. They broke camp without much talk, packed their gear, with the quiet efficiency they had developed over 3 days on the trail, and rode east before the sun cleared the ridge. After 2 hours, the trail curved through a dense stretch of pine and emerged at the base of a canyon. Charlotte pulled her horse up involuntarily. The canyon walls rose on both sides so high and so close that the sky became a narrow strip of pale gray overhead. The ground was dark and cool down here, untouched by sunlight, and the silence was absolute. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of something contained, something deliberately enclosed. Jeremiah rode slightly ahead of her. He didn't say anything. He simply rode into the canyon, and after a moment she followed. The passage lasted nearly 20 minutes. At the far end, the walls began to angle outward. The gray strip of sky above widened. The air, which had been cold and close, began to breathe again. And then the canyon ended, and the world changed. Charlotte's horse stopped on its own. She didn't rein it in. It simply stopped because the animal sensed her whole body go still. Before her lay a valley she had never imagined existed. Green, alive, enormous. Rolling meadows spread out in every direction, broken by clear running streams that caught the morning light and threw it back like scattered glass. Stands of timber edged the meadows in dark green walls. Elk grazed in a distant field. Far to the left, 2 lakes sat side by side, mirror calm, reflecting the mountain peaks above them. And in the center of it all, on a rise of ground that gave it a commanding view over everything, sat a house. Not a cabin, not a homestead, a mansion. Stone and timber built with a permanence and a scale that didn't belong in a secret valley hidden behind a canyon wall. It had wings. It had a roofline that rose and fell with deliberate architecture. It had windows, many of them tall and many paned, that caught the morning light in ways that made the whole structure seem almost luminous. Charlotte sat in the saddle and did not speak. Below, she could see workers. Dozens of them moving through the valley with the ordered efficiency of a working estate. Ranch hands, livestock, fenced pastures, equipment she recognized, and equipment she didn't. Everything functioning, everything maintained, everything enormous. Armed men stood at an entrance below. When Jeremiah's horse crested the ridge, several workers stopped what they were doing and looked up. Then, one by one, they removed their hats. Charlotte turned to look at Jeremiah Stone. He was watching her. Not the valley, not his workers, not the mansion. Her. "You're not a trapper," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. "No," he said. "I'm not." "Who are you?" He held her gaze and said the name that explained everything and nothing all at once. "Jeremiah Stonewell," he said. "My family has held this valley for 31 years. The silence between them stretched. Charlotte looked at the mansion, then at the valley, then at the men below who were watching their employer return the way men watched someone they had built their livelihoods around. Then she looked back at Jeremiah. "You lied to me," she said. "I kept a secret," he said. "There's a—" "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't tell me there's a difference, not right now." He closed his mouth. She pressed her horse forward down the ridge toward a life she had not agreed to. And behind her, Jeremiah Stonewell followed, because whatever came next, she was not the kind of woman who would wait for him to lead. She didn't speak to him for the first hour after they rode down into the valley, not because she had nothing to say, because she had too much, and she'd learned long ago that words spoken in the first wave of anger almost never said what you actually meant. They said what you felt, which was different, and feelings without precision had a way of doing damage you couldn't take back. So Charlotte rode in silence, and she watched. She watched the way the workers moved when Jeremiah passed, not scrambling, not fearful, but with the particular ease of people who trusted the man at the top of their operation. A woman carrying linens from one building to another nodded at him with a small smile. A gray-haired man in work clothes met them near the main entrance and shook Jeremiah's hand with both of his, the way men did when they meant it. "Good to have you back," the older man said. Then his eyes moved to Charlotte, and his expression shifted into something careful and welcoming. "Ma'am." "This is Eli Marsh," Jeremiah said to her. "He manages the estate." How long have you been here, Mr. Marsh? Charlotte asked because she was already building her map of this place, and she needed reference points. 22 years, Eli said. Since before the main house was finished. 22 years of keeping a secret this size. She filed that away. Inside the mansion, and she could not stop her mind from using that word. Even as another part of her refused to be impressed by it. She was shown to a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire main floor of her family's homestead. The furniture was solid and well made without being ostentatious. Books lined one wall. A window looked out over the valley. She set her 2 bags down in the middle of the floor and stood very still for a moment. Then she turned around and found Jeremiah standing in the doorway. "Close the door," she said, "and explain yourself." He came in. He closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood near the window with his arms at his sides, which she was beginning to understand was how he stood when he was being as honest as he knew how to be. "I was going to tell you when we arrived," he began. "You were going to tell me when it was too late to say no," she said. "That's one way to see it. Is there another way?" "Yes." He met her eyes. "I was going to tell you when you could see the whole truth at once instead of pieces of it that wouldn't make sense out of context." Charlotte folded her arms. "Then give me the context now, all of it. Don't decide what I can handle. I have 38 days of harvest experience. I've run a ranch since I was 17, and I've been managing a dying man's finances for 2 years. I can handle context." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more like recognition. "My father built this estate beginning in 1858, he said. He found the valley on a surveying trip, recognized what the land was worth. The water sources, the timber, the minerals underneath, and spent 8 years acquiring legal title to every acre before anyone else understood what he had. By the time people started asking questions, it was all documented and registered in Helena." He paused. "When he died, it came to me. I was 23. How old are you now?" 34. "So you've been running this for 11 years? "Yes." "Alone?" "With Eli and the staff, but in terms of the larger decisions, yes, alone." Charlotte looked at him. Why the disguise? And here something changed in his face. The measured control loosened slightly, the way a wall showed its age, not all at once, but in small fractures you had to look closely to see. "Because the moment people know what this place is worth," he said, "everyone who looks at you stops seeing you. They see the land, they see the water rights, they see the timber contracts and the mineral surveys and the number at the bottom of the balance sheet." He paused. "I had 2 engagements. Both ended when I showed the women where I actually lived." Charlotte waited. The first one wrote to her father within 2 weeks of arriving. "I intercepted a letter asking him to help her find grounds for annulment so she could take a cash settlement instead." He said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. The second was more direct. "She sat across from me at dinner right here in this house and told me that she thought we could reach a more efficient arrangement if I simply paid her a sum and we went our separate ways." "They wanted the money without the man," Charlotte said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "And so you decided to test the next one by presenting yourself as someone with nothing." "I decided," he said carefully, "to find someone who would make a decision about me before knowing what I owned. Someone whose answer had nothing to do with any of this." He gestured briefly, meaning the mansion, the valley, all of it. Someone who said yes when she thought she was agreeing to a hard life. Charlotte stared at him for a long moment. "That is," she said slowly, "either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, or a profound manipulation of another human being." "I know," he said. "I've thought about which one it is for quite some time. And I think it depends on what I do next," he said. "Which is why I'm standing here telling you everything instead of letting you figure it out yourself." Charlotte turned away from him. She walked to the window. Outside, the valley rolled away in every direction, extraordinary and impossible and entirely real. "I want 3 things," she said, her back still to him. "Name them." "I want full access to every document related to this estate. Ledgers, land, surveys, legal filings, contracts. Everything. A pause. Done. I want to meet everyone who works here within the week. Properly introduced, not paraded past. Also done. And I want your word, your actual word, not a negotiated version of it, that you will never again decide what information I can or cannot have about my own life. The silence that followed was long enough that she turned to look at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something serious and settled, and underneath all of it quietly relieved. "You have my word," he said. Charlotte nodded once. "Then we can start," she said. She began the way she began everything unfamiliar methodically. The first 3 days she spent learning the physical reality of the estate. Not the beauty of it, not the scale of it, but the working logic. Where the water came from, how the livestock operation was structured, which contracts were active, which were pending, which had problems tucked inside language that looked fine on first read. Eli Marsh became her primary guide, partly because he clearly knew everything, and partly because she sensed he approved of her approach in a way he was too professional to say directly. "You've been managing this place for 22 years, she said to him on the second day walking the perimeter of the main ledger room, where records were kept in ordered rows of leather-bound volumes. "Has he ever brought anyone else up here?" "2 women," Eli said carefully. "Before you. I know about them." Eli looked at her with what might have been surprise. "He told you?" "All of it." She pulled a ledger from 1882 and opened it. "Who does the accounting currently?" "Mr. Stone handles the primary books himself. I manage the payroll ledger." She ran her finger down a column of numbers. Something didn't line up. Not dramatically, just a small pattern in the quarterly figures that suggested either an error in categorization or a contract drawing from the wrong account. "This," she said, turning the book toward Eli and tapping the entry. "What is this payment category?" Eli leaned in. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That would be the Langford arrangement," he said. "Who is Langford?" "A businessman out of Helena. Mr. Stone has a timber supply agreement with his company." Charlotte looked in the figures again. The payments were irregular. The amounts varied without obvious explanation. And the recipient account changed twice in 3 years without any notation. "When did this agreement start?" she asked. 1886. "Has Jeremiah reviewed it recently?" A very brief pause. "Not to my knowledge, ma'am." Charlotte closed the ledger and set it aside. "I'd like all documents related to Langford on this table by tomorrow morning," she said. Eli nodded, but she noticed he didn't immediately say yes. That evening at dinner, which they ate in a room that could have seated 30 but held only 2, Charlotte told Jeremiah what she'd found. He set down his fork. "Langford's a solid businessman. The timber contract is straightforward. The payment irregularities might be nothing," she said, "but I'd like to understand them." "You've been here 2 days," he said, not unkindly. "I've been managing account books for 7 years," she said, "and something in that ledger reads the way my father's did 2 years before we were in serious trouble. I might be wrong. I probably am. But I'd like to understand it." He looked at her across the table for a moment. Then he said, "I'll pull the full Langford file." "Eli's getting it for me. I asked him this afternoon." Another pause. Longer this time. "You asked Eli before you asked me," Jeremiah said. "I found it before dinner," she said. "You're here now. I'm telling you now." Something settled in his expression. He picked up his fork again. "Fair enough," he said. They finished dinner mostly in silence, but it was a different silence than the first days. Less wary. More like 2 people thinking in the same room, which was its own kind of progress. On the 4th day, something happened that shifted everything. 3 riders came through the canyon. Not ranch hands. Not traders. Men in business clothes with an official look to them that didn't belong in a hidden mountain valley. Charlotte was in the ledger room when she heard the commotion outside. She went to find Jeremiah already at the front, his jaw set, and his posture carrying the particular tension of a man who'd been expecting something he'd hoped wouldn't come. "Who are they?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Associates of Victor Langford," Jeremiah said. His voice was low and controlled. "I've dealt with them before." "What do they want?" "They periodically send representatives to discuss expanding the relationship." "What does that mean?" "It means Langford wants more than a timber contract, and has been finding polite ways to suggest it for 3 years. The 3 men were shown into the main sitting room. Charlotte followed without being invited or uninvited. Jeremiah glanced at her once, then said nothing. The lead man's name was Aldrich. He was polite in the way that powerful men were polite when they thought they were in a stronger position than you, smoothly with a layer of condescension under the surface that he probably didn't even notice anymore because it had been there so long. "Mr. Stone," he said. "A pleasure." His eyes moved to Charlotte with the automatic assessment of a man cataloging who she might be and deciding immediately that she was probably not relevant. "And? My wife," Jeremiah said. Something crossed Aldrich's face. Recalculation. He hadn't known. "Congratulations," he said with a smile that didn't move his eyes. "I wasn't aware you'd married." "It was recent," Jeremiah said. Charlotte watched Aldrich. He moved on from the fact too quickly, which told her it mattered more to him than he was showing. "Mr. Langford wanted me to revisit the proposal we discussed in March," Aldrich said, settling back in his chair with the ease of someone practicing familiarity. "Given the territorial survey results that have come in..." "I told him in March what my position was," Jeremiah said. "Your position in March was based on incomplete information. The survey results changed the picture considerably." Aldrich leaned forward. "The mineral deposits under the southern pasture are substantially larger than initially estimated. And the water source feeding the North Lakes, we've had engineers look at it. It's one of the most significant untouched water rights in Montana Territory." "I'm aware of what I own," Jeremiah said. "Then you understand why Mr. Langford believes a partnership arrangement would benefit you significantly. Rather than managing this estate alone." "I'm not alone," Jeremiah said. Aldrich glanced at Charlotte again. This time she held his gaze and didn't look away. Something shifted in his expression, the first real crack in the polished surface. "Mr. Stone," he said, shifting his weight slightly. "The railroad is coming through this region regardless of individual land decisions. The question is whether you're positioned advantageously when it does, or whether you're left behind," Jeremiah said. "Is that the word you're looking for?" "I wouldn't have chosen it," Aldrich said smoothly. "But the reality is that without partnership, isolated landholders in the path of territorial expansion historically find their position more complicated than they anticipated." The room was very quiet. Charlotte had been listening to every word, filing every phrase, and what she heard underneath the polished language was a threat dressed in a business suit. A politely delivered version of cooperate or find yourself outmaneuvered. "Mr. Aldrich," she said. Every man in the room looked at her. Aldrich with mild surprise, Jeremiah with something more careful. "When you say the survey results have changed the picture," she said, keeping her voice conversational, "are you referring to the territorial survey conducted in spring, or to a private survey commissioned by Mr. Langford's organization?" A very short pause. "I'm not certain of the specific methodology, because the territorial survey results are public record," she said. "I've reviewed them. They don't reference the southern pasture mineral deposits in the terms you just used, which suggests what you're citing is a private survey." She tilted her head slightly. "Conducted on land you don't own without the landowner's permission." The silence this time was different. Aldrich recovered quickly. Men like him always did, but the recovery itself was information. He smiled and redirected and said something about confirming the details of the arrangement at a later date. Within 20 minutes, the 3 men were back on their horses. Jeremiah stood in the doorway and watched them go. Charlotte stood beside him. "How did you know about the territorial survey?" he asked. "I read it yesterday," she said. "It was in the file stack Eli brought me. I wasn't sure why it was there until just now." He turned to look at her. You connected the discrepancy in the ledger to the survey. The Langford payments stopped making sense in 1886, she said. That's the same year the early mineral assessment reports started appearing. I think someone has been feeding him information about this land for 3 years. Information he shouldn't have. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. You're saying there's someone inside this estate working with Langford? I'm saying the evidence points that way, she said. I could be wrong. I'd rather be wrong. She paused. But I don't think I am. He looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was changing around them, and the valley was beginning to settle into its evening quiet. And in that moment, she could see him recalculating something, not the Langford situation, but something about her, about what she was and what this marriage had actually given him. Charlotte, he said. Yes. I owe you an apology. She waited. Not for keeping the secret. I had reasons for that, and I'll defend them. But I owe you an apology for thinking even briefly that what I needed in a partner was someone I could protect. She looked at him steadily. You're not the first man to make that mistake, she said. I'd like to be the last one where you're concerned. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, the Langford file. All of it. Tonight. We need to go through it together. Agreed, he said. They went back inside. Eli set a lamp on the table between the ledgers and left them to it, and Charlotte and Jeremiah Stone sat across from each other in the quiet of a hidden mansion in a secret valley, going through documents side by side, and something between them that had been braced and watchful began very slowly to loosen its grip. Three weeks into her life in the valley, Charlotte understood why Jeremiah had hidden it. The beauty was part of it, the sheer scale of what existed here, the self-contained world of it, the way the canyon kept everything inside like cupped hands. But the real reason was simpler and more human than landscape. This place had been built by love, his father's love for the land passed to a son who'd inherited not just the property, but the instinct to protect it. And love, real love, was always vulnerable. You hid the things you couldn't afford to lose. She understood it. She didn't entirely forgive it, but she understood. What she didn't yet understand was the full shape of what was coming toward them. Because on the 22nd day of her time in the valley, a letter arrived, not through the usual courier route. This one had been slipped under the door of the main house before dawn, which meant someone who knew the canyon access had placed it there. Someone with knowledge of the estate that no outside party should have had. It was addressed to Jeremiah, but he brought it straight to Charlotte before he opened it. She thought that meant more than he probably intended it to. She watched him break the seal and read it. She watched his face go very still. He handed it to her without a word. The letter was from Victor Langford. It was brief, professionally written, and devastating in its precision. Langford was not requesting a meeting. He was notifying Jeremiah that he intended to file a competing land claim in territorial court, based on what he described as documentary evidence that the original 1858 survey had contained errors that invalidated portions of the Stone family's title. The letter named specific parcels, the parcels that contained the water rights and the southern mineral deposits. And at the bottom, a single line that wasn't legal language at all. I would prefer to resolve this as gentlemen, but I am prepared to be thorough. Charlotte set the letter down. He has someone giving him the parcel numbers, she said. Someone inside this estate. Yes, Jeremiah said. And he's been building toward this for 3 years, while you thought it was just a timber contract. Yes. She looked at him. His face was controlled, but she had spent enough time watching him now to see underneath the control the anger, and underneath the anger something older. The particular weariness of a man who had built something and spent his life fighting to hold it, and had just discovered the fight was bigger than he'd realized. Then we find who's feeding him information, Charlotte said, and we pull that thread before he can file a single document. Charlotte, And then we pull every record that predates 1858 and build a case so airtight that when he does walk into that territorial court, he walks out embarrassed. That's not a small amount of work, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. A silence. You're angry, he said. Furious, she said. This man sent representatives into your home and sat in your chair and spoke to you like you were someone he could manage, while someone inside this valley was writing him letters about your land. She pressed her hand flat against the letter on the table. Nobody does that to my family. The word landed between them. My family. Neither of them had used it before. Neither of them addressed it now. But Jeremiah looked at her across the table with something in his face that was quieter and deeper than anything she'd seen there yet. Where do we start? He asked. The 1858 survey, she said, and the Langford ledger discrepancies. And I want to know which of your staff has had contact with anyone from Helena in the last 6 months. That could take days. Then we start tonight, she said, and reached for the first ledger. And Jeremiah Stone, who had hidden a valley, a mansion, and 11 years of his life from the world, sat down beside the woman he had married when she had nothing to gain from him. And for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, he did not face his fight alone. They worked through the night. Not romantically, not the way stories made it sound. Two people bent over candlelight discovering truths together in soft, golden warmth. It was hard, grinding work. Charlotte's eyes ached before midnight. Her back stiffened from sitting too long in the same position over ledger pages that hadn't been opened in years. Jeremiah refilled the lamp twice. Eli brought coffee at 2 a.m. without being asked, set it down without speaking, and went back to bed like a man who had learned long ago when his presence helped and when it didn't. By the time pale light started pressing through the windows, Charlotte had built a picture she didn't entirely want to believe. She set down her pen and straightened in her chair. "Come look at this," she said. Jeremiah came around the table and stood behind her, looking over her shoulder at the pages she had arranged in chronological order. The irregularities in the Langford payments start in April of 1886, she said, moving her finger along the entries. Small at first, amounts that could be explained as rounding errors or contract adjustments. But here, she tapped a page from 1887. The payment structure changes completely. The amounts become larger and they cycle through 3 different account notations. This one, and this one. Those are internal accounts, Jeremiah said slowly, not the main operating ledger. Exactly. Someone had to know those account numbers. And the only people who had access to internal account designations were your estate manager and your 2 senior bookkeepers. Jeremiah was very still behind her. That's not all, Charlotte said. She turned to a separate stack. The parcel numbers Langford cited in his letter. The specific ones the South Pasture mineral rights and the Northern water claim. Those parcel designations aren't in any public territorial record. They're internal survey markers, your father's notation system. Which means Langford's source didn't just have access to the payments, Jeremiah said. They had access to the private survey documents. Yes, Charlotte said. And those documents are kept in one place. She watched him understand it. Watched his jaw tighten and his shoulders settle into something harder than anger, the controlled stillness of a man absorbing a specific and personal betrayal. The archive room, he said. Who has keys? Eli, myself, and Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed was the senior bookkeeper. 41 years old, 15 years with the estate. A quiet man who Charlotte had met briefly on her second day, and who had given her the particular kind of formal politeness that she now understood differently than she had at the time. "Have you noticed anything different about Reed in the last year?" she asked. Jeremiah moved away from the table. He went to the window, put his hand against the frame, and stood there thinking. "He asked for a salary increase in February," he said slowly. "I gave it to him. He seemed satisfied." A pause. He also asked twice about the Langford timber arrangement, said he wanted to make sure the accounts were properly categorized. He turned. "I thought he was being thorough." "He was," Charlotte said. Just not for you. The silence that followed had a particular quality, the silence of trust being re-examined and found to have been misplaced. She had seen that look on her father's face once, when a neighboring rancher he'd vouched for turned out to have been quietly stealing water access from their creek. It left a mark that practical resolution didn't fully remove. "Don't confront him yet," Charlotte said. Jeremiah looked at her. "If he knows we've found the trail, he warns Langford, and Langford accelerates the filing," she said. "We need the full picture before we move. We need to know everything he passed along and exactly when, so we can assess what Langford actually has and what he's bluffing about. You want to let a man who's been selling my land secrets keep walking through my house? For a few more days," she said. Yes, he didn't like it. She could see that clearly, but she also watched him weigh it and arrive at the same place she had. "Fine," he said. "But I want everything confirmed before the week is out." "Agreed," she said. "Now get some sleep. You look like a man who's been arguing with ledgers all night." "I have been arguing with ledgers all night." "Then you'll be no use to me tired." She gathered the pages into an ordered stack. "I'll need 4 hours myself, and then I want to go through the original 1858 survey records. All of them." He watched her organize the documents with the focused efficiency of someone who had already moved from the problem to the solution. "Charlotte," he said. "What? Are you always like this?" She looked up. "Like what?" "Like someone who processes catastrophe by making a list." "Yes," she said simply. "It served me well." He almost smiled. "Me too," he said quietly. And for a moment in the gray early morning, with the lamp burning low between stacks of evidence of betrayal, something passed between them that was quieter and more solid than anything that had come before. She found what she needed in the survey archive on the second afternoon. The original 1858 documents were in better condition than she had expected. Her father-in-law had been a methodical man, and the records had been stored with care. She went through them page by page, comparing notations against the parcel claims Langford had cited in his letter. What she found made her sit back in her chair and press her fingers against her temples for a full minute before she spoke. Eli, who had been helping her locate specific reference volumes, watched her from across the table. "What is it?" he asked. "The 1858 survey is airtight," she said. "Every parcel correctly documented, every boundary clearly established, filed with the Territorial Office on August 12th of that year. Witnessed by 2 federal surveyors and a territorial judge." She tapped the page. "This claim of Langford's that the original survey contained errors that invalidate portions of the title it can't stand. Not against this documentation." "Then why is he filing?" Eli asked. "Because he doesn't need to win," Charlotte said, and the clarity of it hit her even as she said it. "He needs to tie this up in territorial court long enough for the railroad legislation to pass. If the title is in dispute when the rail corridor decision gets made, this land becomes legally complicated to route around. It creates leverage. He's not trying to take the valley. He's trying to use the lawsuit to force Jeremiah into a negotiated sale before the case resolves." Eli was quiet for a moment. "That's a sophisticated play," he said carefully. "He has sophisticated backers," Charlotte said. "This isn't just Langford. A private survey, access to internal parcel notations, a 3-year patience campaign, this has investment money behind it. Someone is funding this who wants the railroad rights-of-way badly enough to spend years setting up the leverage." She needed to think. She stood paced the length of the room twice, then stopped. "Who in Helena would benefit most directly from a rail corridor through this valley?" she asked. "There are 3 syndicates bidding for the territorial contract," Eli said. "The Morrison Group, the Pacific Western Consortium, and Langford's own holding company, which is—" He paused. "Which is what?" Charlotte said. "Which has significant investment from 2 members of the territorial legislature," Eli said. "Men who will be voting on the rail corridor decision." Charlotte stared at him. "That's not just a business play," she said. "That's corruption." "I didn't say that," Eli said carefully. You didn't have to. She was already moving toward the door. Where's Jeremiah? She found him in the eastern field, talking to his foreman, and she pulled him aside without ceremony. Langford's investors include territorial legislators, she said. This is bigger than a land dispute. It's a coordinated play. Reed feeds him the internal documents the lawsuit creates. Title confusion. The confusion gives his legislative backers cover to route the rail corridor through this valley under eminent domain provisions, while the title is technically uncertain. Jeremiah went very still. They're using the court system to manufacture a window, she said. And they're counting on you fighting it as a land case when it's actually a political one. If the legislators are involved, he said slowly, filing in territorial court alone won't be enough. They'll delay. They'll reassign the case. They'll find procedural grounds to extend it past the corridor vote. Yes, she said, which means we don't just need to prove the title. We need to expose the corruption publicly before the vote happens. When is the vote? I don't know yet. We need someone in Helena. She met his eyes. Do you have anyone you trust there? Completely trust. He thought for a moment. Judge Albert Carver. He mentored my father. He retired from the territorial bench 2 years ago, but he still has significant relationships in the capital. Can you get a letter to him today, if I send a rider within the hour? Then do it, and tell him everything. The Langford letter, the legislative investors, the internal documents, everything. Jeremiah was already turning. She caught his arm. And Jeremiah. We need to deal with Reed before the end of today. He stopped. You said wait. I said wait until we had the full picture. She said. We have it. They confronted Thomas Reed together in the archive room with the evidence laid out on the table between them. To his credit, the man didn't run. He sat very straight in his chair and looked at the documents Charlotte had arranged with the expression of someone who had known this moment was coming and had spent some private time deciding how to face it. How much did he pay you? Jeremiah asked. It wasn't. Reed stopped, started again. It wasn't only money. What else? Charlotte asked. Reed looked at her. My brother has a land filing in the Bitterroot Valley. Langford's organization controls the water access. He told me if I cooperated, the water issue would be resolved. A pause. My brother has 4 children. The room was quiet. Charlotte looked at the man, the genuine difficulty of him, not the villain she had constructed from ledger entries, but a human being who had made a terrible choice under real pressure for comprehensible reasons, and she felt the complexity of it settle on her shoulders. When did you first pass documents? She asked. 1886, April. Did you know what he was building toward? Not at first, Reed said. By last year, yes. I understood by then. He looked at the table. I told myself it was too late to stop. It was never too late to come to me, Jeremiah said, and the quiet devastation in his voice was worse than anger would have been. Reed said nothing. What has he received in the last 30 days? Charlotte asked. The parcel survey notations, the water claim documentation, and... Reed hesitated. And what? Charlotte pressed. A list of your active contracts, the names of your timber buyers and your water lease agreements. He's going to approach them, Jeremiah said immediately. Try to get them to breach or renegotiate before the filing. Yes, Reed said. Charlotte was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Who is the first name on that contract list? Patterson Timber, out of Missoula. Send a rider tonight, she said to Jeremiah, before Langford's people get there. Jeremiah nodded once. Then he looked at Reed with an expression Charlotte couldn't entirely read. Not cold, not forgiving, somewhere in the complicated territory between. You'll write down everything, Jeremiah said. Every document you passed, every communication, every name, and you'll sign it. That's a confession, Reed said. Yes, Jeremiah said. It is. And then what happens to me? Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment. "That depends on whether what you give us is complete," he said, "and whether you're willing to say it publicly if it comes to that." Reed looked at the table. His hands, Charlotte noticed, were shaking slightly. "All right," he said. The letter to Judge Carver left within the hour, carried by the fastest rider on the estate, with instructions not to stop except for the horses. 3 riders went to Patterson Timber with a letter from Jeremiah personally, and a full accounting of what Langford's organization was attempting. 2 more riders went to the other major contract holders. Charlotte spent the rest of the afternoon sitting across from Reed at the archive table, taking down his account in careful handwriting, asking clarifying questions without expression, building a document that would be usable in front of a court or a newspaper or both. It was exhausting work, not physically the kind of exhaustion that came from being absolutely precise for hours when precision mattered enormously. She didn't allow herself to lose focus. She didn't allow herself to react to anything Reed said, regardless of how it landed. She needed the information clean, undistorted by her own feelings about it. When it was done, she had Reed sign every page. She brought the document to Jeremiah that evening. He read it in full standing without sitting down. When he finished, he set it on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and stood there for a moment. He gave Langford enough to file a genuinely complicated claim. He said, "This isn't going to be simple." "No," she agreed. "Even with the original survey documentation, a filing with these specific parcel notations will take months to resolve, maybe longer." "I know." She sat down. "But we're not just fighting the filing. The corruption angle," he said. "If we can prove that legislators with financial stakes in Langford's organization are positioned to vote on the rail corridor, the filing becomes secondary. The story becomes about the corruption. And stories about corruption, told loudly enough and publicly enough, have a way of collapsing faster than court cases." Jeremiah looked at her. "You're talking about going to the newspapers." "I'm talking about going to everyone," she said. "Judge Carver can help us understand which channels in Helena are trustworthy. But we should be prepared to take this to a territorial hearing to the press and to every contract holder Langford has tried to pressure." She met his eyes. "We make this so visible that there's nowhere for it to hide. That means exposing the valley," he said. And she heard under the practical statement something older and more personal. The thing he had protected longest and most fiercely. She looked at him for a moment. "Not the valley itself," she said carefully. "The title to it, the legal ownership, the corruption surrounding it." She paused. "The canyon stays a canyon. The location stays private. But the legal existence of this estate becomes part of the public record in a way it hasn't been." "People will come," he said, "once they know it's here." "Yes," she said. "Some of them will. And you'll deal with that because you're capable of it and because the alternative is letting Langford win." She held his gaze. "You can't keep something this important hidden forever. You can only make sure the people trying to steal it don't get the chance." He was quiet for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "when I rode down to your family's ranch, I had a list of qualities I was looking for." She raised an eyebrow. "A list. Mental, not written. Practical, smart, honest, courage. And I underestimated what those qualities actually looked like in practice," he said. "I thought I was bringing someone here who could stand beside me. I didn't know I was bringing someone who would stand in front of me when I needed it." Charlotte looked at him steadily. "I don't stand in front of you," she said. "I stand next to you. There's a difference." He almost smiled. "There it is again?" "Precision matters," she said, echoing his own words from the porch weeks ago. "Especially in partnerships." This time he did smile. Small, real, without performance. Then his face shifted back into the focused seriousness of a man with a war to plan. "Judge Carver will need at least 5 days to respond," he said. "What do we do in the meantime?" "We audit every document Reed touched in the last 3 years," she said. We identify everything Langford has and everything he doesn't. And we find out who his legislative backers are by name. She pulled her chair closer to the table. Then we build the case that makes exposure unavoidable. He pulled his own chair out and sat down across from her, reached for the top ledger. Where do we start? 1886, she said. April, the beginning. And they began again. The response from Judge Albert Carver arrived on the 6th day. Charlotte was in the archive room when Eli brought it in, and she could tell from the way the old man carried it quickly with both hands that it wasn't ordinary correspondence. She waited until Jeremiah arrived before she broke the seal. The letter was 2 pages written in a precise elderly hand that still carried the authority of a man who had spent 30 years making binding decisions. Judge Carver confirmed that he knew of Victor Langford. He confirmed that the 2 legislative investors Charlotte had identified were exactly who she thought they were. And then he wrote something that made both of them go completely still. Victor Langford had already filed, not in the territorial court in Helena, in a federal district court in Washington, D.C., a maneuver that bypassed the territorial system entirely and would bring the case under federal jurisdiction where his local contacts had no reach. The filing date was 12 days ago, which meant Langford had filed before he sent the letter to Jeremiah. The letter hadn't been a warning. It had been a distraction. He filed first, Jeremiah said. His voice was very quiet. He sent the letter to make us think we had time. Charlotte reread the relevant passage from Judge Carver's letter. The legal language was precise and damning. Langford had filed a federal adverse claim against specific parcels of the Stone estate, citing the same survey irregularity argument he'd mentioned to Jeremiah, but dressed now in federal standing that would take considerably longer and considerably more to untangle. He's smarter than I gave him credit for, Charlotte said. And she said it without embarrassment because underestimating an opponent was a mistake worth naming. What does Carver recommend? Jeremiah asked. She turned to the second page. He says the federal filing changes the landscape but doesn't close it. The original 1858 survey documents, properly authenticated and submitted through federal channels, are still the strongest counter-evidence available. She looked up. But he also says we need representation in Washington, someone with federal standing who can move quickly. I don't have a federal attorney, Jeremiah said. No, she said. But Judge Carver does. She held up the letter. He's offered to make an introduction. There's a name at the bottom, a lawyer in Helena who has federal practice and who Carver personally vouches for. How fast can this man move? According to Carver, faster than Langford is counting on. She set the letter down. But Jeremiah, there's something else. She pointed to a paragraph midway down the second page. Carver says the federal filing is a matter of public record. It's already been reported in the Helena Daily Independent. The silence that followed was different from all the others. People know, Jeremiah said. About the claim, Charlotte said. The valley's location isn't in the filing, but the name Stonewell, the existence of the estate, the scope of the land claim, yes, it's public. He sat down in the chair behind him. Not heavily carefully, the way a man sat down when he needed a moment to absorb something without showing how much it cost him. Charlotte watched him. She did not fill the silence with reassurance, because he didn't need reassurance. Right now, he needed the space to feel what this meant to him, a man who had protected his privacy for 11 years, and had it stripped away not by his own choice, but by someone who wanted to force exactly this exposure. After a long moment, he looked up at her. Everything my father built, he said. Everything I've kept contained. It's going to be picked apart in public. Yes, she said simply. And there's no way to stop that now. No, she said. There isn't. He looked at the letter in her hands, then at the stacked ledgers on the table, then finally at her. Then we don't try to stop it, he said. We control it. Something settled in her chest, not relief exactly. Something more like recognition, the particular satisfaction of watching a person find their footing after something knocked them sideways. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. We go to Helena, he said. We contact Carver's man. We bring the original survey, Reed's full confession, and every piece of evidence we've built in this room. And we walk into that federal process as people who have nothing to hide and everything to prove. And the newspapers, she said. And the newspapers, he agreed. We tell the story our way before Langford tells it his. Charlotte nodded. Then she gathered the key documents into an ordered stack and looked at him across the table. How soon can we travel? 2 days, he said. I need to secure the estate and arrange for Eli to manage while we're gone. 2 days, she agreed. Then we go to Helena and we end this. What neither of them knew yet, what couldn't be known yet, was that ending it would require Charlotte to walk into a room full of men who had never once expected her to speak, and to speak in a way that made every one of them listen. That part was still coming, and she was without knowing it yet entirely ready for it. The ride to Helena took 3 days. Jeremiah had wanted to bring 4 armed men. Charlotte told him to bring 2. We're walking into a legal proceeding, not a standoff, she said. Show up with a small army, and we look like people who are frightened. Show up with documents and a lawyer, and we look like people who are right. He brought 2. She spent most of the 3 days on horseback, reviewing the documents she had packed into a leather satchel that never left her side. Reed's signed confession. The original 1858 survey, authenticated by Eli's notarized statement. The full record of irregular Langford payments, with her written analysis of the pattern. A letter from Patterson Timber confirming that Langford's representatives had indeed contacted them 12 days prior, attempting to renegotiate terms under the suggestion that the stone title was under question. And Judge Carver's introduction letter for the federal attorney, a man named Samuel Holt. Jeremiah watched her work from horseback and said very little. She appreciated that. She needed to think, not to talk, and he had learned the difference. On the second night, camped outside a small way station, she sat by the fire going over the case structure in her mind and became aware that he was watching her. What? She asked without looking up. I'm trying to decide if you're nervous, he said. I'm not nervous. I'm preparing. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She looked up at him. I've never spoken in front of a formal proceeding before, she said. If that's what you're asking. It is. Then yes, partly. She looked back at the documents. But I know what I have, and I know what they don't expect. That combination has won arguments before. You sound like a lawyer. I sound like a woman who has spent the last 3 weeks living inside a conspiracy and took good notes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Samuel Holt is good. Carver wouldn't vouch for someone who wasn't. Let him take the lead in the procedural pieces. I intend to, she said. But there are things in these documents that only I fully understand because I built the picture myself. If there's a moment where Holt needs support, I'll be there. They'll try to dismiss you, Jeremiah said. It wasn't a warning exactly. More like something he felt she should hear from him before she heard it from strangers. I know, she said simply. It won't be subtle. It never is. She closed the document on her lap. Jeremiah, I grew up in a valley where the bankman spoke to my father and looked past my mother when she tried to speak. Where the doctor explained my father's condition to our male neighbor rather than to me, the person actually caring for him. Where 3 different men told me in the weeks after my father got sick that I should find a husband quickly because a woman couldn't manage a ranch alone. She met his eyes across the fire. I have been being dismissed my entire life. It stopped working on me a long time ago. Jeremiah looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said quietly. I just wanted you to hear that I see it, and that it's wrong. She held his gaze. That was not a thing men said. Not in her experience. Not plainly without softening it or turning it into a compliment about how remarkable she was. Just, I see it. It's wrong. Thank you, she said. They let the fire burn down and slept a few hours and were back in the saddle before sunrise. Samuel Holt was a compact man of 50 with sharp gray eyes and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that urgency and speed were not the same thing. He received them in his Helena office on the afternoon of their arrival, read every document Charlotte set before him without speaking, asked 6 specific and intelligent questions, and then sat back in his chair. "The original survey is clean," he said. "The Langford claim has no genuine legal foundation. In a straightforward proceeding, this resolves in your favor within 60 days. "But it isn't straightforward," Charlotte said. "No," Holt agreed. "The federal filing is a delaying tactic. The legislative angle makes it a political problem as much as a legal one, and the fact that they filed in Washington rather than Helena tells me they know the local territorial courts would move quickly against them." "How do we counter the federal delay?" Jeremiah asked. "We file an emergency motion to expedite on the basis of economic harm, specifically the contract pressures Langford's people have applied to your timber buyers. That creates urgency the court has to acknowledge." He looked at Charlotte. "Patterson Timber's letter is critical. Do you have signed correspondence from any of the other contract holders?" "2 more arrived before we left," Charlotte said, pulling them from the satchel. "Hendricks Waterworks and the Cole family grazing lease." Holt took them, read them, and nodded. "Good. 3 documented instances of third-party interference while a federal claim is pending. That's coordination, and coordination is provable." He set the letters down. "Now, the legislative investors. Judge Carver named 2 men in his letter. I need everything you have on the financial connection between them and Langford's holding company." "I have the ledger analysis," Charlotte said. "But the financial connection is circumstantial at this stage. I traced the payment irregularities through 3 internal accounts. What I can prove is that someone with inside knowledge fed Langford information. What I can't yet prove directly is the legislative funding structure." "That's the hardest part," Holt said. "Without documentary proof of the legislative investment, we can allege the conflict of interest, but not establish it." "Reed's confession references communications he received from Langford's organization," Charlotte said. 2 of those communications mentioned interested parties in the Capitol who require a resolution before the spring session. That's not naming names, but it's a thread." Holt looked at her. "You're thorough," he said. "It was a statement, not a compliment." "I had to be," she said. He turned to Jeremiah. "The territorial hearing on the rail corridor vote. I need to know exactly when it's scheduled." "We don't know," Jeremiah said. "I do," Charlotte said. Both men looked at her. "It's in the letter Reed received in March, the one that referenced the spring session." She pulled a page from the satchel, a copy she had made of the relevant portion of Reed's confession. "He was told the corridor vote would be heard in the 2nd week of April. That's 23 days from now." Holt sat forward. 23 days, he repeated. "Which means the federal delay strategy only works if it keeps the title question open past that date," Charlotte said. "They don't need to win the claim. They need the cloud of uncertainty to exist on April 14th. Holt was quiet for a moment. She could see him restructuring the case in his mind, moving pieces into new positions. "Then we don't fight the federal claim first," he said slowly. "We go to the territorial hearing directly. We present the title evidence and the corruption evidence there publicly before the vote. Force the legislators with financial stakes to either recuse themselves or vote on a record that will follow them." "Can we do that?" Jeremiah asked. "Bring evidence to a legislative hearing that was convened for a different purpose." "The hearing is open," Holt said. "It's a public proceeding on a territorial infrastructure question. Anyone can submit evidence relevant to the corridor decision, and if the relevant evidence happens to demonstrate that 2 voting members have undisclosed financial interests in the outcome—" He picked up his pen. "Yes, we can do that." "Then that's where we go," Charlotte said. The next 8 days were the most concentrated work of her life. Holt's office became their base of operations. Charlotte worked with his 2 associates building the evidentiary package for the territorial hearing, while Jeremiah spent his days visiting every business contact and landholder he could reach in Helena, quietly and methodically establishing the record of Langford's interference campaign. The results came in gradually, then all at once. On the 3rd day, A timber merchant named Graves confirmed in a signed affidavit that Aldrich, the same man who had sat in their mansion's sitting room 4 weeks ago, had approached him personally with an offer to buy out his contract with the Stone estate at above-market rates, contingent on the corridor vote going in a certain direction. On the 5th day, one of Holt's contacts in the federal filing office sent word that Langford had hired additional attorneys in Washington and appeared to be preparing for an extended proceeding, confirming that the delay was intentional and coordinated. On the 6th day, something happened that Charlotte had not anticipated. A woman arrived at Holt's office. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed without being wealthy, with the careful composure of someone who had made a decision that cost her something and was committed to it anyway. Her name was Margaret Aldrich, the wife of the man who had sat across from Charlotte in the Valley Mansion. She asked to speak to Mrs. Stone. Holt looked at Charlotte. Charlotte said, "Show her in." Margaret Aldrich sat down across from Charlotte and didn't waste time. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," she said, "and I need it to stay that way." "All right," Charlotte said. "He's not a bad man," Margaret said. "I want to say that first. He has done things in this Langford business that are wrong, and I think part of him knows it. But he's in a position where he's afraid to step back." "What does he know?" Charlotte asked. Margaret opened her bag and produced a folded document. "He kept copies," she said, "of everything, in case it ever turned against him, in case he needed to protect himself." She set the document on the table. "This is the investment agreement between Langford's holding company and the two legislators, with amounts, dates, signatures." Charlotte looked at the document without touching it. "Why are you bringing this to me?" she asked. "Because my husband is going to be on the wrong side of this when it breaks open," Margaret said. "And I would rather he cooperate now than be standing next to Victor Langford when it all comes down." She met Charlotte's eyes. "He won't come forward himself, but if this document is already in your hands, he doesn't have to." Charlotte studied the woman across from her. The courage it had taken to walk through that door. The loyalty and the pragmatism knotted together in the act protecting her husband by going around him, which was its own kind of love. "Mrs. Aldrich," she said carefully, "if this document is used in a public hearing, its origin will likely become clear." "I know," Margaret said. "Your husband may face consequences. Fewer than if this goes the other way," Margaret said. "And he knows it. He just can't say so." Charlotte nodded slowly. She reached across and took the document. "Thank you," she said. Margaret stood, straightened her coat, and left without another word. Charlotte sat alone for a moment, holding the paper that had just changed everything, and felt the full weight of how many people's private decisions were folded into a single political act. Then she stood up and went to find Holt. Chapter 8. The territorial hearing convened on a Tuesday morning in the main legislative chamber in Helena. The room was built for official proceedings, and it showed high ceilings, long tables, the elevated bench where the three-man hearing panel sat, with an air of controlled impartiality that Charlotte suspected was more practiced than genuine. In the gallery above, reporters from 3 newspapers had taken seats. Word had reached the press. The story was already spreading. Langford was present. He sat with 4 attorneys at a long table to the left, impeccably dressed, composed in the way that men were composed when they were confident they had more power than the room knew about. He glanced at Charlotte once when she and Jeremiah took their seats beside Holt, and his expression didn't change, which told her he had already decided she didn't matter. That was fine. The proceeding opened with testimony from the Corridor Commission engineers and surveyors, presenting the proposed rail route and its projected economic impact on the territory. It was thorough and detailed, and to Charlotte's patient assessment entirely irrelevant to what was about to happen. An hour in Holt rose and requested permission to present evidence relevant to the corridor decision from the perspective of affected landholders. The panel chair, a cautious man named Whitfield, who Charlotte had already assessed as someone who cared deeply about his reputation and would therefore do the right thing if given sufficiently clear evidence, granted the request. Holt presented the Stone title documentation first. Clean, methodical, organized. the original 1858 survey, the federal registration, the chain of title through 31 years. He laid it out with the unhurried precision of someone who understood that an airtight case didn't need drama, it needed clarity. Then he presented the Langford claims deficiencies, the absence of any legitimate survey error, the use of internal parcel notations that could only have been obtained through unauthorized access, Reed's signed confession submitted as Exhibit 9. Charlotte watched the room as this happened. Watched the reporters lean forward in the gallery. Watched two of Langford's attorneys exchange a look. Watched the panel members make notes with increasing attention. Then Holt said, "The panel's attention is also directed to evidence of coordinated financial interest in the outcome of today's proceeding." The room changed. Langford's lead attorney was on his feet. "Objection to the relevance." "The relevance," Holt said calmly, "is that two members of the territorial legislature with voting authority on today's corridor decision hold documented financial stakes in the organization filing the adverse claim against the land in question. This creates a conflict of interest that this panel has an obligation to address before any vote proceeds." He submitted the Aldrich document, the investment agreement, with amounts, dates, and signatures. Charlotte watched the moment it was placed before the panel. She watched Whitfield pick it up and read the first page. She watched his expression do the thing that careful, reputation-conscious men's expressions did when they understood that they were holding something that made the situation completely unignorable. He set it down. He looked at the two legislators seated at the back of the room. "Gentlemen," he said in a tone that was very quiet and very final, "I need to ask you to step outside while this evidence is reviewed." One of them started to object. The other one touched his arm, and they both stood and walked out, and the sound of that was loud in the way that significant things were loud not in decibels, but in meaning. Langford said something to his lead attorney in a low voice. The attorney shook his head. Charlotte watched that exchange very carefully. The attorney was telling him something he didn't want to hear. She thought she could read it in the shape of the exchange it's over. Not the words, but the meaning. Then Whitfield looked across the room at Charlotte. This was the part she hadn't anticipated. She had prepared for Holt to carry the proceeding. She had prepared to support with documents and clarifications if needed. She had not prepared for the panel chair to look directly at her and say, "Mrs. Stone, I understand you conducted the primary documentary analysis in this matter. I'd like to hear from you directly." Langford's lead attorney objected immediately. "The witness has no standing in this proceeding. This is a hearing, not a trial," Whitfield said without looking at the attorney. "I determine relevance." He looked back at Charlotte. "Mrs. Stone." Jeremiah's hand found hers under the table. A brief pressure. Then he let go. She stood. The room was very quiet. In the gallery, she was aware of reporters with pencils ready. She was aware of Langford's four attorneys arranged in a row of contained displeasure. She was aware of Holt beside her, perfectly still, giving her the space. She was most aware of the three men on the panel who were looking at her with varying degrees of expectation and assessment, and, in at least two cases, a faint but legible condescension that she recognized like an old acquaintance. "Mr. Chairman," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, just clear. "The document pattern I identified across 3 years of the Stone Estate's internal ledgers demonstrates a coordinated and deliberate campaign to manufacture the appearance of title uncertainty for a piece of land whose ownership has been documented and uncontested for 31 years. She paused. The purpose of that campaign was not to correct an error. There was no error. The purpose was to create a window, a period of legal ambiguity, timed specifically to coincide with today's corridor vote, during which this panel would be pressured to route a federal rail corridor through privately held land under terms favorable to the syndicate attempting to seize it. Nobody interrupted. She kept going. "I want this panel to understand what that corridor route would mean in practical terms. It would not simply pass through the Stone Estate. The engineering survey filed with the Commission projects a route that would destroy the primary water source serving 14 downstream ranch operations in the Clearwater drainage. 14 families. Combined, they represent over 300 men, women and children, whose water access would be permanently compromised for the financial benefit of a syndicate, whose investors include members of this very legislative body. She set a document on the table before the panel. This is the engineering survey cross-referenced against the downstream water dependency map I obtained from the Territorial Water Commission. The Commission produced this map. I simply put it next to the corridor proposal. Whitfield picked it up. Nobody told them to look at it together, she said, but I think you'll agree that it speaks for itself. The room was very quiet. Whitfield studied the document. He passed it to the panel member on his left. That man studied it and passed it right. All three men read it. Nobody spoke. Then Whitfield looked up at her. How long did this analysis take you? The water dependency piece 2 days, she said. The full evidentiary picture took 3 weeks. You're not an attorney. No, sir, she said. I'm a rancher's daughter from the Bennett Valley, who knows how to read a ledger and follow a number until it tells the truth. Something moved in the room. Not quite laughter, something warmer than that. In the gallery, she heard pencils moving quickly. She sat down. Holt leaned slightly toward her. That, he said very quietly, was exactly right. She didn't respond. She was watching Langford. He was leaning back in his chair with his hands folded on the table, and for the first time since she had walked into this room, the composure was showing its seams. Not dramatically, just in the slightly too deliberate stillness of a man holding himself in position through effort rather than confidence. His lead attorney leaned close and said something. Langford shook his head once sharply. The panel recessed for 40 minutes. When they returned, Whitfield spoke for 11 minutes in the measured, precise language of a man building a record that would withstand future scrutiny. The corridor vote was tabled pending review of the conflict of interest evidence. The 2 legislators with documented financial stakes in Langford's organization would be referred to the Territorial Ethics Commission. The stone title based on the documentary record submitted was confirmed as uncontested pending federal resolution, which Whitfield formally recommended be expedited on the basis of the coordination evidence presented. And then he said one more thing. It is the finding of this panel that the adverse claim filed against the Stone estate was prepared using documentation obtained through unauthorized access to private records, and that the filing was timed with deliberate intent to interfere with this proceeding. This panel is referring the matter to the Federal Attorney's Office for investigation of the coordination between the Langford organization and members of this legislature. Victor Langford stood up. His attorney grabbed his arm. He sat back down. It was over in that moment. Not completely. Not finally, the legal threads would take months to fully resolve. But the structural collapse was happening right now in this room, and everyone in it could feel it. Charlotte looked at Jeremiah beside her. His jaw was set and his eyes were forward, and she could see the controlled force of a man who had spent 11 years protecting something and had just watched it be protected for him in public by the woman he had married when she had 2 bags and nowhere left to go. He turned his head and looked at her. You just told a room full of legislators and attorneys and newspaper reporters that you're a rancher's daughter who follows numbers until they tell the truth, he said quietly. That's what I am, she said. Tomorrow, that's going to be in every newspaper in the territory. Good, she said. Let Langford read it. Outside the chamber in the wide corridor where reporters were already converging and conversations were fracturing into a dozen urgent directions, a man Charlotte didn't recognize stepped forward and introduced himself as the editor of the Helena Daily Independent. Mrs. Stone, he said, would you be willing to speak on record about how you assembled this case? She looked at him, then at the reporters behind him, pencils and notebooks in hand. Yes, she said, but I want to be precise. Is that acceptable? Perfectly, he said. Jeremiah stood slightly behind her and to her left. Not in front, not managing, just present while Charlotte told the story to the press with the same methodical honesty she had applied to every ledger page in that archive room in the mountains. She told it simply. She told it accurately. And she did not let anyone interrupt her until she was finished. The Langford organization withdrew the federal claim 11 days later. Not because they were forced to, because the evidentiary ground had shifted so completely beneath them that continuing was more expensive than retreating. The two legislative investors resigned their committee positions before the Ethics Commission completed its preliminary review. Aldrich gave a formal statement through his attorney that confirmed the coordination consistent with what his wife had already provided. On the evening the withdrawal was confirmed, Holt sent a letter to Jeremiah with a single additional line at the bottom, handwritten after the formal closing paragraph. "Your wife is the finest documentary analyst I have encountered in 30 years of practice. Do not let her go." Jeremiah read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. That evening, he found Charlotte in the small sitting room of the Helena Hotel, writing a letter home to Clara. He sat across from her and waited until she finished the paragraph she was on. She looked up. "It's done," she said. She had already seen the notice. "It's done," he confirmed. She set down her pen. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "Tired," she said, "and glad, and ready to go home." She said it without thinking. Home. And then she heard the word and felt it settle in her chest in a way that surprised her. Not the valley exactly, not the mansion, but something larger than either of those things. Something she hadn't had since before her mother died, and the weight of everything began. Jeremiah heard it too. She could tell. But he didn't make it into a moment, he just accepted it the way he accepted things that mattered, with quiet and without performance. 2 days, he said. Then we ride. She picked up her pen again. Good, she said. I have 3 more letters to write. He sat across from her in the comfortable quiet while she wrote them, and neither of them said anything more that night, because there was nothing more that needed saying. They rode back into the valley on a Thursday morning, and the first thing Charlotte noticed was that the workers had gathered. Not formally, nobody had arranged them into a line or instructed them to be present. They had simply stopped what they were doing when the riders came through the canyon, and now they stood in loose clusters along the approach to the main house watching. Some held their hats. Some raised a hand. The woman who had smiled at Jeremiah on Charlotte's first day stood near the front with her arms folded and her chin up, the particular posture of someone who had been worried and was now letting themselves stop. Charlotte had not expected to be moved by this. She was moved by it anyway. Eli met them at the entrance. He shook Jeremiah's hand and then turned to Charlotte and did something she would think about later. He nodded to her first, before he said anything, the way you nodded to someone you had decided to trust completely. Everything's in order, he said. We've had no further contact from anyone connected to Langford. 2 of your contract holders sent letters while you were gone, both reaffirming their agreements. Patterson? Jeremiah asked. First one in, Eli said. Jeremiah exhaled, not dramatically. The quiet exhale of a man releasing something he had been holding for a long time. How is the mood here? Charlotte asked. Eli looked at her. Better than it's been in 3 years, he said. People know what you did in Helena. Word travels. Word traveled fast, Jeremiah said. We've only been gone 2 weeks. The Helena Independent ran the story 4 days after the hearing, Eli said. Someone sent a copy up through the courier route. I may have read it aloud in the dining hall. A pause. Twice. Charlotte looked at him. You read it aloud. The parts about the water dependency analysis in particular, Eli said with the dignified composure of a man who was absolutely not going to apologize for this. People here have families in the downstream valleys. It mattered to them to know someone had laid it out in front of a government panel and made them look at it. She didn't say anything to that. She didn't need to. The first week back had its own rhythm, different from the frantic compressed urgency of the Helena weeks, but not quiet. There was the formal federal correspondence to manage now that the Stone title had been confirmed through Holt's expedited motion. There were letters from 3 territorial newspapers requesting follow-up statements. There were 2 requests from landholders in adjacent valleys asking about the water dependency documentation Charlotte had submitted to the hearing panel, wanting to know if the analysis applied to their situations. She answered all of it, methodically, one thing at a time. On the 4th day back, a letter arrived from her father. It had been forwarded through the courier system Jeremiah had established for family correspondence. A system she realized now that he had set up before they left the valley, the first time quietly, without announcing it. As if he had known she would need it. Her father's handwriting was shakier than she remembered. But the words were clear, and the first line made her sit down where she was standing. "Clara told me what you did in Helena," he wrote. "I read the newspaper account 3 times. I want you to know that your mother would have read it 3 times too, and then she would have cut it out and kept it in her Bible and told everyone who came to the house about her daughter, who followed numbers until they told the truth. I am telling everyone who comes to the house. I am not as good at cutting things out, but I am trying." Charlotte sat with that letter for a long time. When Jeremiah found her, she was still holding it. He sat down beside her without asking what was wrong because he had learned by now that nothing was wrong, she just needed to be still, sometimes when something hit her fully. After a while, she handed him the letter. He read it, set it on the table between them. "He sounds stronger," Jeremiah said. "He does." She paused. "I want them to visit. Papa, Clara, Thomas. When Papa is well enough to travel." "Of course," he said. No hesitation, no qualification. She looked at him. "This is their family too now," she said. "That's what I mean. Not a visit. I mean this is their home as much as it's mine." Jeremiah met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "It is." And she believed him. Not because he said it without hesitation, though he had. Because in the 7 weeks she had known him, she had learned that this man said exactly what he meant, and nothing beyond it. His words were not decorative. They were commitments. On the 9th day back, Thomas Reed asked to speak with Charlotte. She agreed, which surprised Eli, who had been quietly managing the question of what to do with Reed since the Helena outcome. The man had remained on the estate at Jeremiah's measured decision, not retained in his previous role, not dismissed existing in an uncertain middle state, while the larger situation resolved. Reed came to the archive room, which was perhaps the most uncomfortable location she could have chosen, and was not chosen accidentally. He sat across from her and looked at the table first, then made himself look up. "I want to say something," he said. "Not an excuse. I don't have one. I made a choice for my own reasons, and I don't expect those reasons to matter to you." "They matter," Charlotte said. "They don't excuse it, but they matter." He looked at her with something that was close to surprise. "Your brother's water issue," she said, "in the Bitterroot Valley, with Langford's organization retreating, their control of that water access is going to become legally vulnerable. You should file a challenge within the next 60 days, while the federal investigators are still active in that space." Reed stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your brother has 4 children," she said. "And because you signed every page and told the truth when it mattered, even though it cost you." She held his gaze. "That counts for something. Not everything, but something." He looked at the table again. When he looked up, his expression had the raw, unguarded quality of a man who had been braced for punishment and received instead something he didn't have a framework for. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Probably not," she said. "Do it anyway." He nodded once slowly. "Eli is going to reassign you to the Western pasture accounts," she said. "Away from the archive. Those terms are Jeremiah's, and they're fair. If you want to stay, those are the conditions." "I want to stay," he said immediately. "Then stay," she said, "and Thomas." She waited until he met her eyes. "If there is ever again a moment when someone applies pressure to you from outside this estate, you come to us first. Not after. Not when it's too late. First." "Yes," he said. "I understand." "Good," she said. "That's all." He stood, and at the door he paused without turning around. "Mrs. Stone," he said. "For what it's worth, I am sorry." I know, she said. Now go find Eli. The second week back brought something nobody had anticipated. A delegation arrived at the canyon entrance, not from Langford, not from Helena, not from any of the organized interests that had been circling the valley for 3 years. These were ranchers, 7 of them from the downstream Clearwater drainage that Charlotte had identified in her water dependency analysis. They had ridden 2 days to get there. Eli came to find Jeremiah and Charlotte together in the East office, where they had developed the habit of reviewing the day's correspondence side by side each morning. 7 ranchers at the entrance, Eli said. They asked specifically for Mrs. Stone. Charlotte and Jeremiah looked at each other. I'll go, she said. We'll go, he said. She considered arguing and decided not to. They went together. The 7 men were weathered and serious, the kind of ranchers who didn't make 2-day rides for casual reasons. Their spokesperson was a broad man named Callum Reed, who had the directness of someone who had prepared a speech and decided at the last moment to skip it. We read what you put in front of that hearing panel, he said to Charlotte. The water map, the downstream dependency chart. Yes, she said. We've been trying to get someone to look at that corridor proposal for 8 months, he said. Nobody in Helena would listen. Nobody wanted to put the ranch operations against the railroad money. He paused. You put it in front of them in 20 minutes. I had good documentation, she said. And the timing was right. The timing was right because you made it right, Reed said. We know that. He looked at her steadily. We want to know if you'd be willing to help us formalize the water protection argument. Not just for the Clearwater drainage. There are 4 other valley systems that would be affected by this rail expansion if it goes further west. Which it will. The railroad doesn't stop. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. This was new territory. Not a defensive action. This was being asked to go forward to take what she had built under pressure and extend it deliberately. She felt the weight of that differently than she had felt the urgency of the Langford fight. That had been necessary. This was chosen. She looked at Jeremiah beside her. He said nothing. He simply looked back at her with the expression she had come to understand as his version of complete deference, the particular stillness of a man who has decided a decision isn't his to make. She turned back to Reed. Tell me which valley systems, she said. And bring your water access documentation when you come back. All of it. I want to see what I'm working with before I make any commitment. When should we come back? Reed asked. Give me 2 weeks to get this estate's immediate correspondence resolved, she said. Then come back with your documentation and we'll sit down properly. Reed nodded. He looked at Jeremiah briefly, then back at Charlotte, and she recognized the look, the slight recalibration of a man who had arrived expecting to negotiate with the husband and found the conversation already settled somewhere else entirely. 2 weeks, he said. We'll be here. That evening, after the ranchers had gone and the day's work was done, Jeremiah found Charlotte on the upper floor of the mansion standing at the tall window that looked out over the valley. She heard him come in. She didn't turn around. You're going to do it, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to think about it, she said. You've already thought about it. You told him 2 weeks because you wanted the time to appear measured, not because you need it. She turned then. He was leaning in the doorway with his arms folded, watching her with the quiet attention she had come to think of as simply his way of seeing fully, without commentary, without trying to reshape what he saw. It's a significant commitment, she said. It is. It would mean travel. Time away from here. Working with people I don't know on problems that are politically complicated. Yes, he said. You'd be here alone. I've been alone before, he said. I'm considerably better at being here now than I was then. A pause. And you wouldn't be gone indefinitely. This is your home. That word again. Home. She had been saying it and hearing it and feeling it settle differently each time, layering into something real. I want to do it, she said. I want to help those families before the railroad runs another proposal through a room where nobody's looking at the downstream map. Then do it, he said simply. Just like that. Just like that, he confirmed. Charlotte, I married you because I wanted a partner. A partner does the things she's built for, and you, he looked at her steadily, are built for exactly this. She held his gaze. You make it sound uncomplicated. The logistics are complicated, he said. The decision isn't. She turned back to the window. Outside, the valley was moving into the particular golden hour when the light changed everything it touched. Workers finishing the day. Animals settling. The sound of the estate at the end of its working hours. The full lived-in sound of a place that was genuinely alive. I've been thinking about something, she said. Tell me. The workers here. The families on permanent lease. The schools you've been building since the Langford business resolved. She paused. You were doing that before I got here. The wages, the leases. That wasn't something you started because of the fight. No, he said. I started it because it was right. Why does no one know that? She asked. People in the valley before I came here, they called you a hermit, a drifter. They didn't know any of this existed. She gestured at the valley below. They didn't know what you were building up here. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was carefully. Because I told myself that what happened here was private, that it wasn't the world's business whether I was building something good or not. He paused. And partly, if I'm honest, because I wasn't sure it was good enough yet. It's easier to protect something from judgment when you keep it hidden. Charlotte turned to face him fully. It's good enough, she said. And she said it the way she said things she had examined and confirmed, not as comfort, not as warmth, but as fact. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. I know that now. She crossed the room and sat in the chair by the window. He sat in the other one, angled toward her the way they sat when they were working through something together, which was how they sat most evenings now, not opposite each other, but alongside. I want to tell you something I've never told anyone, he said. She waited. When my father died, Jeremiah said, I was 23. I had this entire estate, all the land, all the operations, all the legal complexity of what he'd built, and I had no one to hand any of it to. No partner. No one who knew what it had cost him to put it together. He looked at the window, not at her, the way people looked when they were seeing the past instead of the present. I told myself for 11 years that it was fine, that I had built it further than he left it, that it was running well, that I had Eli and good people around me, and it was enough. He paused. And I believed it. That's the strange thing. I genuinely believed it was enough. What changed? She asked quietly. I started watching people, he said, down in the valley, when I rode through as Jeremiah Stone the mountain man. I watched how people talked to each other. Couples, partners, people who argued in public and laughed about it afterward. People who made decisions together, and were wrong together, and figured it out together. He turned from the window to look at her. And I understood that what I had built here was large. It was real, and it was good, and it was large. But I was the only one who lived inside it. And a life that only one person lives inside isn't... He stopped. Isn't a life, she finished for him. Isn't complete, he said. There's a difference. She almost smiled. There you go again. He did smile. Small and real, the smile she had come to think of as the true one, not the careful social expression he used with business contacts, but the one that appeared when something actually reached him. I was wrong about something, Charlotte said. He looked at her. When I arrived here, when I first saw the valley and the house and understood what you'd hidden, I told myself that I'd been manipulated, that the arrangement was fundamentally dishonest, and I would decide whether to forgive it over time. She looked at her hands. But I was applying the wrong frame. I was thinking about it as something done to me, and it wasn't that. What was it? He asked. A man who had been burned twice, she said, trying to find one honest thing in a life where his wealth made honesty almost impossible to locate, and making a clumsy choice in the attempt. She looked up at him. It was clumsy. I want that on record. Absolutely on record, he agreed. But it wasn't dishonest, she said. Not at the core. You told me from the beginning that you had resources you couldn't explain yet. You told me you'd be honest when we arrived. You kept your word. I cut it close, he said. You did, she agreed. Don't do it again. No, he said. I won't. The valley outside was darkening now, the last of the light pulling back from the meadows and the lake surfaces and the estate settling into its evening quiet. Inside the lamp on the side table was the only light in the room. My father is going to love this place, Charlotte said. It came out suddenly without planning, which meant it was something she had been thinking about without realizing it. When can they come? Jeremiah asked. Spring, she said. When the canyon passes are clear and he's stronger. Clara and Thomas could come ahead. They don't need to wait for the weather the way Papa does. I'll have Eli open the south wing, Jeremiah said. There's enough room. There's enough room for half of Montana, she said. Then we should probably fill some of it. She looked at him. He said it simply without a layered meaning she was supposed to interpret the way he said most things, but it landed with a fullness that she felt in her chest, the particular warmth of a future being discussed by two people who have decided without quite announcing it that they intend to have one together. One thing at a time, she said. Always, he agreed. In the weeks that followed, the territory's understanding of what had happened in Helena settled into the public record the way significant things did, slowly at first, then all at once. The federal investigators released an interim report confirming coordinated interference between Langford's organization and two territorial legislators. Both men resigned before the report was finalized. Victor Langford himself retreated to his primary business interests in the East and was not heard from again in Montana Territory, at least not in connection with the Stone estate. The Helena Daily Independent ran a 3-part series on the case. The second installment focused entirely on Charlotte's documentary analysis and the water dependency argument. It was reprinted in 2 other territorial papers. She read all 3 reprints, once found them substantially accurate, and moved on. The Clearwater ranchers came back in 2 weeks, exactly as Callum Reed had said they would, with their documentation in order. Charlotte spent 3 days going through it with the same systematic attention she had given the Stone estate ledgers, and by the end of the 3rd day, she had identified 4 specific legal filings that needed to be made before the next legislative session. She wrote to Holt. He wrote back within a week. They established a working arrangement that required Charlotte to travel to Helena twice in the following year and correspond regularly between visits. Jeremiah organized a reliable courier system. He said nothing about the arrangement beyond the logistics, and she loved him for that, for understanding that what she was doing wasn't a departure from their life together, but an extension of it. Robert Bennett made the journey to the valley in late May, when the canyon pass was clear and the spring was fully established. Charlotte rode out to meet him at the canyon entrance. He was thinner than she remembered. The winter had cost him. But his eyes were the same present and warm, and full of the specific pride that her father had always expressed, not in words, but in the way he looked at her when she had done something he couldn't quite find the language for. He looked at the valley when the canyon opened. He didn't speak for a long moment. "Charlotte," he finally said, "I know Papa. You married a stranger," he said. "You rode into the mountains with a man you'd known for 4 days. I did. And this is where you ended up." "This is where I ended up," she said. He turned to look at her. His eyes were wet, which he would have been embarrassed about if he'd known she noticed, so she looked at the valley instead of at him. "Your mother would have—" he started. "I know," she said again softly. He reached over from his horse and took her hand the way he used to in thunderstorms. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good." They rode down into the valley together. Jeremiah met them at the entrance and shook Robert Bennett's hand with both of his, the way Eli had shaken Jeremiah's when he came home from Helena. Charlotte watched the 2 men look at each other. Her father reading the man who had married his daughter, and Jeremiah returning that reading with the steady patience of someone who understood the weight of the assessment and accepted it. Whatever passed between them in that handshake, it was enough. Clara arrived the following day with Thomas, who immediately and without self-consciousness asked Eli if he could help with the livestock operations, and was told yes. Clara walked through the main house with wide eyes, and then found Charlotte in the archive room, of course in the archive room, and sat down across from her. "Charlotte," Clara said. "Don't say it the way Papa did," Charlotte said. "I've already had the version with the wet eyes." He cried. He would say no if you asked him. Clara looked around the room, at the ordered ledgers, at the documents in careful stacks, at the system her sister had built inside someone else's estate, and made functional and then defended in front of a government panel, and turned into a tool that was now protecting 14 ranch families in a drainage valley. "Are you happy?" she asked. Charlotte considered the question the way she considered everything honestly, without reaching for the comfortable answer before she was sure it was the true one. "Yes," she said. "Not the way I expected to be. Not the way the stories say it is. But yes." She met her sister's eyes. "I came up here thinking I was sacrificing something. I was wrong about that." "What were you doing instead?" "Finding out what I was actually for," Charlotte said. "It just took a stranger with a secret valley to give me the room to find out." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "He loves you, you know." "I know," Charlotte said. "Does he say it?" "Not in those words," Charlotte said. "He says it in the way he sets things up before I know I need them. In the way he reads the room and decides when to speak and when to be quiet. In the way he sat in a Helena hotel room for 3 evenings while I wrote letters and didn't ask me what I was writing or when I would be finished." She paused. "Some people say it. Some people do it. He does it." "And you?" Clara asked. Charlotte thought about what she did. She thought about the way she had stood in that hearing room and laid out a case for 14 families she had never met because the numbers told the truth and someone had to say so loudly. She thought about how she had sat across from Thomas Reed and told him where to file his brother's water challenge. She thought about the way she reviewed the estate correspondence alongside Jeremiah every morning, not because she had to, but because it was theirs together, and she had stopped thinking of it any other way. "Yes," she said. "In my way." Clara smiled. "Good," she said. Clara. "What?" "Stop looking at me like I've done something remarkable." "You've done something remarkable." "I followed numbers until they told the truth," Charlotte said. "And I married a man worth knowing." She picked up her pen. "Now let me finish this correspondence before dinner." That evening the family ate together in the room that could seat 30, all of them, Robert and Clara and Thomas and Eli, who had been invited and accepted with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that invitations of this kind were not casual. Charlotte sat at one end and Jeremiah at the other, and the sound of the table was loud and warm and complicated. The way families were complicated, full of conversations going in 4 directions, and Thomas trying to tell 2 stories at once, and Clara correcting him and Robert Bennett laughing for the first time in 2 years at something Thomas said that Charlotte missed because she was talking to Eli. She caught Jeremiah's eye across the table. He was watching her, not the room, her. With an expression she had no single word for something that held steadiness and gratitude, and the particular satisfaction of a man who had built something real, and finally let someone else inside it. She raised her water glass slightly. He raised his. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The hidden valley had kept its secret for 31 years. The canyon still stood. The estate still sat in its protected hollow in the Montana mountains, known now in the legal record, but not in the popular imagination, a place that existed on paper and in the lives of the people who lived and worked there, but that the wider world hadn't found and wasn't likely to soon. What had changed was simpler and more permanent than geography. A man who had spent 11 years living alone inside something too large for one person to carry had found the woman who didn't want to be carried through it, who wanted to walk through it beside him, reading every ledger and following every number and standing in front of every room full of men who hadn't expected her, and saying what she knew to be true until they listened. The mansion was not the secret. The valley was not the secret. The secret had always been simpler than either of those things, and it was no longer a secret at all. It was a Tuesday evening in a dining room in Montana, full of noise and food and family, and Charlotte Bennett Stone was exactly where she had chosen to be. Not rescued, not surrendered, not settled for. Chosen with clear eyes on her own terms, with full knowledge of what she was agreeing to. And that was the only kind of home worth having.